Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for your time and having you all here. It's a really pleasure, and it's really a nice distraction from everyday life to do a presentation this way and connect with you all, because I miss the people most, and I think everybody does as well. So this is a really nice way to do that. Let me get into my presentation. So just because it's a COVID-19 group, I just thought I'd give you an overview where I am. I'm in Athens, Georgia. It's about an hour away from Atlanta. And we have a population of about 125,000 and 35,000 students, because Athens is home of the University of Georgia. But the students have all been gone. And that was a good decision that we closed down early and had that shelter in place very early. But still, the numbers are creeping up. And I wrote the presentation yesterday, it was 98. Unfortunately, this morning was 102. So yeah, we all hope, like everybody, that this will pass soon. So a little bit about myself. Because not everybody knows me. So I'm in the localization industry for 20 years, German born. I used to live in Germany, worked for SDL for several years in strategic business development, focusing on life science, renewable energies, automation. And that brought me along. That's how I met a lot of people, because I went to many, many conferences. And before that, and that's why I'm here with the M&A, I worked for Mercedes Benz in Germany at the headquarters for 10 years, and 3 of them in the M&A division. So M&A is something that I'm very familiar with. And when I moved to the US, I've met Mike Klinger. And Mike is the CEO of Anzu Global, which is a staffing company, in case anybody needs some talent or staffing, they can help with that. And Mike, along the way, was asked always about, hey, I don't need staffing, but I want to sell my company, or I want to buy a company. And so he started about 3 years connecting sellers and buyers. And last year, he incorporated language transactions. And I was working with Mike with Anzu Global already. So he asked me, he says, hey, you have that M&A background. Don't you want to join me with language transactions? And we can take care of this together. And I said, well, that's awesome. I mean, bringing 2 of my passions together, the language industry and the M&A. So that was really a hit for me. And so Mike, since he has such a great network, especially here in the US, I'm focusing on the business outside of the US. Well, so M&A, and I was at a conference, probably the only conference so far that had happened, the ELIA conference in Canada. And Renato was speaking there, and Esteban from Slater was there. And I talked to them, and everybody agreed that it may not hit our industry as hard as other industries, but still it has arrived. I've been talking to smaller LSPs, and they see a drop in numbers, and everybody's trying to survive. And in M&A, the impact is that it has shifted more from a seller's market to a buyer's market. Before, I had so many buyers in my network that wanted to buy, and the sellers were more like asking for really sometimes crazy conditions, crazy pricing, and like, no. But now it's shifting. It's shifting that way, at least from our point of view. So this is reflected here, my personal point of view. And and Esther from Slater, she predicted in that keynote presentation that the numbers are already dropping, that she sees a drop, that the numbers are going back to where in M&A, you know, where they were like 2 years ago. But we at Language Transactions, we can confirm that. We don't see a number drop. We see a lot of people reaching out. We have people come back that we've been in touch like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And then all of a sudden, they are thinking about selling, so or buying, but more selling. Really, more sellers step forward right now. So so we can connect them with the buyers that we have, or at least start negotiations. So at Language Transactions, there's a couple of things that we do differently than other companies. So first, we know the market. So we know the localization market. We have a huge network of companies, of LSPs, and we know a lot of people. So this is a really great advantage. And it can speed up the process. So the other thing is that while we are working together through the M&A process, we connect the sellers and the buyers, meaning we take care of both. And that is really beneficial when it comes to communication. Because like I get off the phone with the seller and the seller is saying, hey, you know, this is the situation. And then I'll pick up the phone and I call the buyer and I said, hey, I just talked to the seller. So it's really a short way. It's better that way than contacting another broker or somebody else out there. And my last point here, win-win is best. That's what we're always, we want to be fair. We want to be fair to everybody. And if there are some stipulations that people ask for, we try to be within reasons, you know. I mean, we understand that a seller can sell his company only once and want the best conditions. And we defend this to the buyers, but on the other hand, we understand that we cannot, you know, that we cannot let a buyer go by and offering something that is unacceptable, you know. So we really speak a lot when we first we don't even introduce at that point, but we talk to the individual and vet them. And for some sellers or buyers are very experienced, you know, they have done this process before, but then we have other sellers or buyers that have never gone through that process. To them, M&A is, they have no idea how the process goes. So we guide them through the process as well. You know, we help them even connect, like if they are in the US, we have a network, a big network also with CPAs and attorneys and things like that, where we can make a connection. But we stay out of the due diligence phase. I'll come to this at a later slide. But we can help through the process, you know, and definitely we are trying to always look for good fits when we consult our network about who would be a good seller or who would be a good buyer for the particular person. So the seller's questions, I have a slide for the buyers as well, but this is typically what I'm being asked or what I'm asking others. You know, the main thing is what the seller wants to know. How long will it take? You know, it's like, you know, when I think about it today, should I start my process now, but I'm not ready to sell until next year, you know, or in some month ahead? Well, I delivered the answer here. The average is about 6 to 10 months, and sometimes it's longer. You know, it all depends. But I think 6 to 10 months is a really safe thing. This is from the first introduction. They talk to each other. They may be able to meet. Well, right now they won't, but at least have, you know, Zoom conferences or whatever. And then they vet. We vetted them. The companies vet. You know, they will share financials, and if the buyer is interested enough, then they present an LOI, and then the due diligence phase starts, and that's typically 30 to 60 days. It's also a matter of negotiations. So what do you want? I ask the seller usually, you know, do you want to sell and leave? You want to stay? Do you want to retire? What, you know, what is it that you have in mind? And sometimes they don't know yet, you know, they just think about, well, I built this company for 20 years and I have a good team and I have good clients, but I don't know if I want to continue doing this. Well, those are personal questions that, of course, we cannot answer. But if somebody vaguely, you know, calls us, they usually have in the back of their mind that they want to sell. And then sometimes they come up with, you know, I introduce them to a seller, to a buyer, excuse me, and sometimes that sparks the light. Then all of a sudden they think, oh man, this can become real. You know, there's somebody that would be actually interested in the company. And I must say, NDAs, of course, are the first step going into that. So yeah, then we ask about, you know, what is the vision for the company? And I must say, the vision for the employees are really the main concern of most sellers. They be like, yeah, I'm thinking about selling, but really I don't know what will happen to my employees when I sell. And this is especially a big issue when you sell to a bigger company, because of course you have synergies and they have finance people, so you have a finance person. What's happening? You know, what can happen here? Or, you know, what happened to your project manager because the buyer has offshore project management or things like that. So I must say that is always a very tricky thing and a tricky situation that most sellers present. And of course, you know, we can find a solution for it. Sometimes they just say, oh no, I'm going to stick around a little longer. So yeah. And another thing, what sellers ask me, especially when I meet them out at the conferences, it's like, yeah, I would be, you know, interested, but where can I find a buyer? I mean, clearly you cannot go to a conference where other LSP owners are like, hey, do you want to buy my company? So that's why it's helpful that we're out there, and that language transactions is really well known. Mike's well known. I'm, well, somewhat known in, especially in the European industry. Yeah, so, and also about, I have an overview here in the financials. I have the things that we're looking at if you're a seller. You know, we want to evaluate your financials, want to see balance sheets, profit and loss. What is the EBITDA? Believe it or not, a lot of companies or LSP owners don't know their EBITDA numbers because they don't do their financials that way. EBITDA is, I think, is a more of an American thing that are now, it's now going more into Europe. But it is helpful if you have your EBITDA number. But of course, you know, your net profit helps as well. Yeah, and then I asked the companies, and this is really interesting. I asked the sellers, I said, so what do you want to sell it for? And boy, sometimes they are so off because they think my company is so unique that that I had a company. They have they do ASL interpreting. So ASL, as we all know, it's a niche in our niche, and they have really good clients. They do a lot. So from our calculation, going by 2.5 or 3 times EBITDA, they would have had a sales price around 800,000. They wanted 5 millions because they thought the company is so unique. And I'm like, okay, this is not happening here. You know, I cannot represent somebody that wants that much and is completely out of the range, although I don't question the value of the company, but this is just what we go by. And cash flow is, of course, something that the companies want to look at. And another thing is, who is preparing your financials? Because we sometimes talk to companies and the owner, the CEO, is doing the financials. There's no CPA involved. So usually the numbers have to be confirmed by somebody. And usually we want to do that before the due diligence phase, because in the due diligence phase, then there are CPAs and attorneys involved, and you already pay somebody. So usually this is something that we want to find out before. We're talking about the buyers a little bit. So typically we have industry buyers, meaning other LSP owners, but more and more we have private equity buyers. And private equity firms are, as a matter of fact, I have one scheduled after this presentation. They are even interesting in companies or in LSPs that other LSPs would probably not want to buy. For instance, if an LSP provides translation services to other LSPs, I'm talking to LSPs, and 95% or 90% of their revenue comes because they provide services to the big, you know, to Transperfect, to the SL, Lionbridge, Morningside, whatever, big localized. So they would not be interested for an LSP buyer, but private equity are interested in those companies. So just because you have only LSPs, or you have only LSP clients, that doesn't hinder to sell. So there could be buyers out there. And then the factors why are people buying, you know? So they wanna grow into other verticals, grow into other geographies or regions. They look for technology advantages, skilled personnel, and sometimes, you know, they're thinking about what I said earlier, which is not so nice. They want to find better way to reduce their staff. But I just mention it because it's something that I come across, and that is real. So here's the industry standard on pricing. So if you're a company under 3 million, usually it's 2 to 3.5, sometimes 4. It all depends on the package, times EBITDA, you know. And then if your revenue is up, then the EBITDA number comes up. And even if you're then around 6 million, then you can ask for your revenue. So, but before, it's always the earnings before interest, taxes, and amortization and depreciation. I forgot the amortization here. That's, like I said, this is just the industry standard, but that's something that we usually go by. And so what we do at Language Transactions I've said a lot already. So we have a lot of buyers and sellers, and we vet them. So before I introduce a buyer, then I already know that this buyer has some means to be able to pay for what what a sensible offer from a seller. So it's not just somebody that comes to me, hey, I want to buy a company, and we don't check them out. So we check. We want to know, how do you want to pay? Sometimes they even provide us with a bank letter, or other means, or they show us in their P&L that they have cash flow and things like that. So and also the sellers, we vet them. We want to know a lot beforehand. We want to know, do they have debt that needs to be considered in a transactions and things like that. So all of this is happening before we make an introduction. And then once we make an introduction, we let the buyer and the seller talk to each other. We stay on the periphery. We are still involved. We take care that all the things happen in a sensible timeline, that nobody is vanishing off into nirvana because all of a sudden it's not a priority for them anymore. So we stay involved. We sometimes are asked by the seller or by the buyer to be in certain calls, just to be in there, help and facilitate a call, and we can do that. And so we help it. But then when we get to the due diligence, when a letter of intent is issued by a buyer, then we step back, because then the buyer comes in with his financial team or her, and they come with the CPAs and the attorneys, but before then, because then they spend money. And I had a deal, I was involved, and it was really unfortunate because everything was great and everything looked great, and we told the buyer, so the seller did not hide any facts that the numbers were declining, and we pointed that out, but it was a really good company. And so we made an introduction, because we did believe, and we do believe, that this company can bounce back, and there was a reason why the numbers were declining. And at first the buyer was, okay, I'm interested. It's an interesting package. They issued an LOI, but then when they involved their CPAs and their attorneys, and I must say, that was an international transactions. The seller was in California, the buyer was in Spain. So we think, or I think personally, that they may have not understood everything about government work and how all of this can, how contracts are issued and those things. So during the due diligence phase, then the buyer came back and said, hey, I don't want to make an offer. And that's what you don't want to hear, but it happens. The buyer said, hey, it's not a good match for me, and they step back. But usually after a due diligence phase, the buyer would make a final offer, and then you either accept or negotiate, or we'll see. Yeah, so this is what we do, and it really helped that we are involved and talk to the buyer and to the seller. And then one more thing, and I think that's very important here, at language transactions, we don't charge for introductions like some M&A companies. They go and they say, like, okay, if we make 3 introductions free of charge, but then we charge. We don't do that. So we send an NDA out in the beginning, and we send out our brokerage agreement, but we only charge once there is a deal, once there is an offer at the end, an accepted offer, and once money flows, then we charge. And this is very unique. what language transactions does, because we spend a lot of time where we're not getting paid. We still help because we love the industry and we want to help people in the industry to move forward. And M&A is just a natural way to keep the industry alive, because what if there is a company, and I come across this a lot, we have companies owners, they come into their years and they build up the companies for 30 years or so, and they want to get out, they want to retire. They say, okay, I stay on for one more year as a consultant or as a coach, but I want to get out. And we think it's very important that we stay involved for our industry here and help them find buyers, you know. So it's not lost. Their good work's not lost, and the people maintain their job, and of course the freelancers as well. As we know, our industry lives, you know, we have a lot of freelancer in our industries, and so we want everybody to continue to get paid and be involved. So I already mentioned a couple of things on what could go wrong in the industry, and I just want to bring it up because there is never a guarantee. You know, people can back out because sometimes when a buyer evaluate, and that even happens before the LOI is issued, that a company, although we ask them and we vet them, but then sometimes there comes some debt forward. Oh, I didn't think that my company credit card would be considered as debt, or, you know, things like that. That this happens. And of course, if it's significant, you know, a buyer doesn't feel good about that, you know, because we ask everybody to disclose in the beginning and honor what we talk about, but it happens. And also buyers sometimes change their mind. Look, right now, you know, we have this big disruption with COVID, so we don't know. So buyers think like, okay, I have the money, but I don't know if I want to spend it right now. And sellers, on the other hand, say, man, I wanted to sell and I wanted to get out of it, but I don't want to go through this crisis and worry about how can I, you know, get my next payroll together and things like that. So so anything, we are people, you know, we are all in this, and we all change our mind. Timing can get off at the end of the day. Certain things or companies, areas, regions are not so beneficial right now to sell into because they have unstable government, things like that. So there's a lot of things that can happen along the way. And as I mentioned before, it's usually 6 to 10 months, and that's a long time for things to happen or can happen along the way. So by the way, if you have any questions, you know, use the chat box, and I can address the questions after the presentation. So here are some case studies, and I also put a link there, and I'm pretty sure Alp's gonna make the presentation available or the recording. Please visit our website, you know, languagetransactions.com. There is some information. We've published a lot of articles. Mike did, and you can find our blog. So it's all interesting to read, I think. And if you consider M&A, then you may find interesting material here in our library, and it's on the home page. If you scroll down, then you find the articles. But we also have case studies, and I just picked 4. I have this page here talking about OXO here. We helped Charles. He wanted to buy in South America, and he did, and we helped him finding a buyer. We also Mike did the deal here with Matt Gradenstein and Acalaro, and then we helped Kimon and Nicole. So this is just that I just put it in here that you see that we're real. We're doing things in the industry, and like I said, you can go on the website, or you can reach out to me or Mike. So I have a couple of more slides. What about the trend? The trends in the industry? Well, this is hard to predict this year because I'm quoting here according to Slater and the presentation that I witnessed in February, where I was already traveling with my face mask. I was the only one on the plane traveling with a face mask, and people said, like, really? I said, yeah, I don't want to get that stuff, So yeah, Esther, she predicted, first of all, she said the mainly growing industry will be the gaming industry. And we can see that also because we have small LSPs stepping forward with, they do a lot of gaming translations, localizations, testing, apps, and they're thinking about buying. So that's really a vivid market right now. And as always in our industry, there is some things, where you have to ask yourself, you want to diversify and do everything in our industry, provide language translation, to in a broad range, or do you want to specialize? And both sells really well, I mean, it all depends on what a buyer is looking for, and what about the synergies. Yeah, so this is something I think all of our hearts bleed when we come to that. We usually present or attend Gala and ILEA and ASL, Log World, TCOM or TC World, SlaterCon and the ALC's event. So for right now, none of them happen. SlaterCon is postponed to September in London, and if it happens, I may think about going there. That's why I put it, because that's usually where you would find us. And although we don't exhibit, but this is always a good meeting place for us, where we meet clients, so we don't have to travel all over the world. We usually arrange meetings around or at the conferences, all depends. So this is what we still plan on this year, if it happens. We want to be at the SlaterCon. We want to be at the ILEA Executive Conference, which was on the Isle of Rhodes in Greece. So they postponed, I think, to October. Log World, I have heard, I have not spoke to Ulrich himself, but I have heard that they have not canceled the June event yet because they don't come out of their contract with Intercontinental. I don't want to spread a rumor here. That's just what I heard. So so I don't know what's going on. Definitely June, I'm not going to travel. I don't trust it yet. And then TCOM is usually at mid-November. So this is probably the conference that may still happen. And if so, I will probably be there. Yeah, so I want to go back. Here's my contact info. I'm on phone and WhatsApp, and also, of course, email, or you can contact me here. We are all in that Facebook group together. So please, you can always reach out to me in the Facebook Messenger. Yeah, and that would wrap it up for me. And if you have some questions, maybe Alp, you wanna take over and see if we have some questions.
First of all, thank you. It was very good to have you here. We have some questions and some comments. First question is from Martine. She asked, could I ask who pays the commission, the seller, buyer, or both?
Both. Yes, that's a really good question. Thanks, Martine. Because we take care of both the seller and the buyer. And like I said, we don't charge for introductions. So we do at the end charge the seller and the buyer for the commission. Thanks for asking.
Another question from Martine again. She says, I believe recent Slater M&A report states that the average sale price is more likely to be 5 to 6 times EBITDA, but you're seeing it more like 2-3 times EBITDA. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, well, that's our experience. So it may, I don't know where Slater gets their data from. They didn't ask us. I don't remember being asked or Mike saying anything. So that's what we usually go by. I would say 3 to 4 with companies under $1 million. That would probably be, because usually I stated 2.5 to 4. It all depends on the package, what the company is bringing forward. But the buyers are usually 5 to 6. You have to bring a lot, more revenue to the table. I mean, I can go back to the pricing if you want to take another look. So this is from our experience and from what we're talking to. So I don't know where Slater gets. And Slater, I mean, I have it ranked here by the revenue. So maybe Slater just made that report overall, and then they would not be off, because if you take the average out of all of the revenue that I have scaled here. Okay. I hope that helps. If you have more questions, you can reach out.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We got a comment from Benny Orr. He says, like in any deal, the price is a matter of supply and demand. I see deals which are much higher when the seller has something interesting for the buyer. A good deal is such that both sides are happy. The magic comes from connecting right parties together.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. If you remember, I had on one of my slides, win-win is best. Absolutely. So if there's a great package and it's worth it, and a buyer wants to grow into another vertical, let's, for instance, say gaming industry, they want to grow into, they don't have that right now, but there is, a great buyer, then yeah, absolutely, the price could go higher. I mean, I'm just talking about industry standard. I'm not saying that this is how it's going to be, but I just want to manage expectations here.
Okay. From Nenad, he's asking, what is the smallest company that is sellable? Meaning, when does a micro company start to get interesting for a buyer? Does it have anything to do with the revenue or revenue at all or not?
Well, no, it doesn't. So it all depends on what you've got. So, and sometimes I have divisions that companies want to sell, like even the bigger company, they may have an office in Eastern Europe that they're not interested anymore to keep alive. And then this small unit would come onto the market. So that's possible. And the smallest, well, even a revenue with $250,000, if an entity like this would come or step forward, it's sellable, absolutely. Like if you bring direct clients, if you bring, a great infrastructure, you may have an office at a location that is desired by a buyer. So I don't want to say there is no deal is too small, but yeah, if you, I've had a freelancer. She stepped forward, and her revenue was $70,000. Well, I have to say, so we go by percentage when we charge at the end, but we also have a minimum fee of $25,000. So if I sell a small entity like that, she had great clients, but it doesn't make sense for me to get involved here, you know, because we have to be realistic. So yeah, there may be a too small, but we always take a look. So we don't say from the beginning, but it's a question you have to consider that our minimum fee needs to get paid at the end. And that sometimes doesn't make sense to involve us, although there still may be a buyer out there.
Okay. From Sotir, if there is a merging between two companies, what about the company name? Which name is used?
Yeah, so that it all depends, you know, usually, and you can see that big companies sometimes swallow up other companies and then they don't keep the name. But for instance, remember foreign exchange got taken over by Amplexor. There is no more foreign exchange right now. So usually the name from the buyer takes over, but it's not necessarily, you know, it all depends. If the buyer want to stay in the background, and with private equity especially, you know, they keep the name of the seller. So anything is possible.
Thank you. Next one is from Alexander. He says, I come from Ukraine, a kind of East Europe, I call it. They really not often buy and sell translation companies here. Can you define the features that make country more open for ME and on the contrary?
Well, that's hard to say. And I mentioned this before. It all depends. You know, if a company that is located in Western Europe or in Asia or in the US, and they want a hub in Europe, in Russia, then they may be interested. But it all depends on how a deal then can happen. You know, there is laws involved and all kinds of things. So it's not our most frequented areas where we have deals. So that's what I can say, and I cannot predict the future. It may change. You know, companies may open up, laws may change and make that easier. But I cannot speak for the future here. But right now, it's not so much.
Okay, and last one is from Jessica. She says, so what all is included in Anzu's services? I get the matchmaking part, but beyond that, I'd like to understand better.
Okay, so it's language transactions. So Anzu Global, as I mentioned before, is the staffing company. So that's why we are incorporated as language transactions. We have, although it's the same CEO, it's a different thing. So what's included in the services is the vetting of buyers and sellers, the introduction, the consulting and guidance along the way, the guidance, the advice, mediation sometimes it's necessary, and just be there for the entire process, from like we make the introduction all the way to the end of the deal, when there is then a handshake and the company has been acquired, and then that's when we send our invoice out.
Okay. I think we don't have any more questions. Anyone has any other questions, or I guess. Okay.
No, that was great. Thank you very much, Dee.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thank you guys for being there. If you have any question, like I said, reach out in the messenger or send me an email, Dee Johnson at languagetransactions.com, or use
Dee,
my WhatsApp. Yes.
one more question from Nuri Salvador. If you are swallowed by another company but plan to retire in the near future, is it interesting to have a holding?
Well, that all depends. You know, it's hard for me to say. But if you want to retire and you want to get out, then usually I have never come across when somebody had a holding. Usually it's that the person, the seller, gets out, is available for. You know, it all depends. Let me say this. Some company owners, some CEOs, they are very much involved still in the operations, right? So if they sell, then we always want them to stay on a year, 2, or even 3. Because if they're very much involved in operations, you have to hire somebody that's going to replace them eventually. And you want them to train that. A lot of clients are dependent upon this personal connection to the CEO. So you want a smooth and a slow transition here. But some CEOs are not at all, you know, they are the CEOs, they overlook, but they have operations managers, they have everybody, you know, they have a second-tier management. And if they sell, then somebody from maybe from their second-tier management right now would be promoted and would take the role once acquired. So I have never come across that case where there's a holding. I usually just come across the situation that owner stays on, and sometimes it's just for I had this in the gaming industry where the owner just stayed on for 6 more months to hand over everything, and then they're out. They wanted to do something else. They didn't retire. They just wanted to do something else, wanted the cash flow and get out. So.
Okay,